Rick Naerebout grew up in dairy. He left dairy. And now, for the past 2 decades, he's been back in dairy and he's taking on a challenging issue. Hi, I'm Dave Price, and this is the American Farmland Owner Podcast. Rick is the CEO of the Idaho Dairymen's Association. He has a lot to think about. For example, how do you help keep these smaller dairy farmers viable, for example? But he's also watching a very sensitive matter these days, and that's the federal efforts to deport people who are in this country illegally. The dairy industry relies on labor from other countries. Rick has some ideas about what he thinks will help, and we will get to those in our conversation. But we will begin with the early years for Rick on the family dairy farm in Michigan. Let's talk about growing up in Michigan. You're a dairy farmer, I assume, from birth, right?
Yeah, pretty much from birth.
Okay.
From the time I was 2 until 20, we dairy farmed in McBain, Michigan. Yeah.
And then eventually family sold the farm, right? And moved?
Yeah, we sold the farm 1999, moved west, landed in Salt Lake City. That's where my dad had gotten a job. Met my wife in Salt Lake City. Got married, spent a couple years in Colorado, and then came to Idaho in fall of '02.
Nice. And the reason I start with all this, I always think that kind of who we are as an adult, we're so much shaped by what we went through as a kid. Do you agree?
I agree, but I'm nothing as an adult as what I thought I was going to be as a kid. So.
Oh, is that right? How's that?
Yeah. I wasn't going to work in the dairy industry.
Well, surprise, surprise, huh? What were you ambitious as a kid? What'd you think you'd do?
Honestly, I don't know that I had many ambitions. Like, I didn't, like, there was not a clear path, but I was like,
Okay.
yeah, I don't want to do this dairy thing. This is a lot of work and this is intense. And yeah, here I am, a lifetime later doing the dairy thing.
And you've had your current gig for like 20 years, right? 20 plus years.
Yeah, we've been managing Idaho Dairymen's Association for, this year is 24 years. Or no, 23 years. I can't do math. 23 years we've been doing this. And I've been the exec since 2017. So, 8 years leading the association.
I don't want to sound like the psychologist as you're lying on the couch in my office, but what was your family's experience going through the business? Did you walk away like in a good place when they sold? Was it the tough finances, if you don't mind getting into that?
Yeah, no, it was a small Midwest dairy, tough finances. Really, it came down to if my brother and I really wanted to take it over, and it took me one trip to California. My sister got married fall of '98, and I went to the Central Valley and I looked at what our competition was doing in California and realized their hospital barns are bigger than our entire operation. I'm not sure we can compete with these dairies in the West. And that was kind of the moment where I knew I wanted to go explore some things before I was going to tie myself to running the family business back in Michigan. So.
And in Idaho, you have about 400 or so producers. Is that still about right?
We're down to 350.
350,
So
okay.
continue to see the same attrition as you see anywhere around the country in farming and agriculture. So we're down to 350. Those 350 dairies milk about 700,000 cows. So pretty good size operations out here in Idaho.
So what's that like for you to experience based on your upbringing, plus you see where the math's going here? What do you try to do as an association to help these smaller producers still make a go of it?
One, I think you have to be realistic that there's no policy that's going to be stronger than capitalism. So if you think we're going to pass, some sort of state or federal regulation that is going to, preserve the small farmer, you're probably kidding yourself. And I say that with the experience of, going to the coffee shop. We would always go to Kelly's in McBain. That's the local coffee shop. The dairymen that are getting coffee there are no different than the dairymen in Idaho going to Choette's in Jerome or Jackson's Corner in Buell, getting coffee or lunch there. They milk more cows here, but it's really very similar personalities, very similar belief systems, very similar ethics. So that everybody's got that in common in the dairy industry, from my perspective. In terms of trying to help the smaller producers, definitely, if you're going to be looking at like greenhouse gas emission reductions, we do center a lot of our research around, hey, how do we help that average size open lot dairy be able to mitigate strategies? They don't have a methane digester company chasing them, or all these other groups that are going to cater to the larger producers chasing them. So we do try to focus some of our research and some of our environmental work around how do we continue to give those small and medium-sized producers the right to do business and find affordable solutions for them, because they don't just come forward like you do with some of those bigger operations and technologies that work at scale.
As I look at some of these trends, sometimes I really struggle with probably my own bias with it. And by that, I mean, like, I'm looking at milk consumption, right? Like, when I was a kid growing up in Southern Illinois, we had milk on our cereal in the morning, and we always had milk at dinner, supper, whatever you call your evening meal, right? And usually mom had us, gave us Kool-Aid for lunch. So we didn't have milk at lunch, although we usually always had cheese of some sort. So it's hard, and we have 2 kids in my family. They have, when they're at home, they basically have milk 3 times a day, every meal, plus with their snack before they go to bed. So for us, I think it's like this foreign phenomenon that's going on in our country, watching where our milk consumption is these days, this decade, where it was in the 70s and 80s and 90s and stuff. So I guess a couple of things here. Is that something that you see as just this cyclical thing, and maybe that gets reversed? Or for the dairy industry, does it just mean that there's going to have to be more emphasis on cheese, yogurt, any other alternative like that?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts around that. First, you're absolutely right. Fluid consumption is in a downward trend, has been. We maybe are starting to reverse that with high protein drinks, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But we're actually consuming more dairy today than we did 10 years ago. And we have a continual increase in dairy consumption. It's just we're consuming it differently. You are seeing more yogurt, especially Greek or high protein style yogurts. You're seeing more consumption there. Definitely more cheese consumption as people have incorporated cheese into multiple pieces of their diet. So we're seeing an overall increase in total dairy consumption as a country. It's just not the traditional fluid milk that you and I remember, where you had that glass of milk at every meal. We are seeing with the strong focus on protein and dairy's ability to deliver protein with low calorie packaging. You look at in our market, Dairy Gold has a fit product. In a lot of the country, they'll recognize Fairlife. You've got a number of these products that are coming out where you've got high protein, low calorie, and that's fitting what consumers are looking for right now. So that really gives fluid consumption an opportunity to rebound and see an increase there. And we're definitely seeing that. Even, Chobani with their drinkables, high protein, low calorie, drinkable yogurts, they're definitely having a day right now as well. And you've seen announcements with plant expansions in both Idaho and New York. So, it's really kind of fun time to be in the industry as people are recognizing what we bring in terms of nutritional bang for the buck. And, you look at something like Maha, where there's even a political focus on it. We fit the bill really well to be able to check a lot of boxes on whether it's a mother looking to buy, the right product, or somebody, focused on their fitness, or even politicians trying to find the right thing for dietary guidelines. Dairy checks a lot of boxes.
And big picture, does it matter for the producers when you're just talking about making a living? And I'm always kind of focused on the smaller and medium size, but does it matter? Does it matter what the end consumption is?
Depends on where you're at. I mean, I'm going to say we want people to eat what Idaho produces.
Yeah.
I got to
Nice
represent
plug.
my guys
Yeah, you
first.
do work in Idaho. Good. Well done. Well done.
But no, I mean, it's just great to see. It's great to see the rebound across the country, across the product mix. You know, we're a cheese state, and cheese
Mhm.
consumption's been healthy for a long time. So, you know, we're definitely getting our own here as well when you look at cheese consumption. But we also have some pretty cool ingredient plants that have been built in the last decade or two that are also really hitting strong. And you know, it's just a good time to be in the dairy industry. It's a great time to be in the Idaho dairy industry.
Okay, so talk about workforce. You've been talking about this a lot lately, and this kind of the tension that a lot of folks in agriculture are dealing with when it comes to immigration and temporary workforces, and we've got raids in some parts of the country, all kinds of stuff. How are you processing all this stuff?
Yeah,
Depends on the
definitely
day,
takes
probably.
definitely takes a lot to try and process and
Yeah.
sift through. You know, what's real, what's maybe been a little bit
Hmm.
exaggerated, what's accurate, what's not. So a lot of time spent trying to sift through the information you're getting to determine, you know, what's real and what should we act on, and what's maybe something that's maybe not quite as solid as some of the other stories you're hearing. And then how do you? I mean, what we do is we do policy for dairy producers, and then how do you take that information and go talk to policymakers about it to help them understand the impacts of decisions that are being made, and how our focus on immigration and how we approach that issue could have profound impacts on, you know, you look at food inflation. It was a major campaign piece
Hmm.
of the last presidential election, and you do too much work around enforcement only on immigration and don't provide legal pathways for, you know, workers to come into country legally, you're going to have major impacts on food inflation. And so really I've been trying to help articulate to policymakers that, hey, this is an economic issue. We understand there's the societal pieces to it, and we agree. We want to know who's in country, and we want to make sure that those that are here are not criminals. They're not doing, you know, things that they shouldn't be doing in country. But the workers that are here that are filling jobs that domestic workers don't want to fill, or that we don't even have enough domestic workers to fill, you know, those individuals should be allowed to stay in country. And there's a huge benefit, a huge societal benefit to them filling those jobs. And just try to talk through that with policymakers and politicians, you know, from anywhere from a local to a state to a federal level, because it's being discussed at all levels of politics these days.
So how difficult is that conversation to have with people? I feel like one of the things that we struggle with these days is that you can find video of something and it can be magnified, right? And then we're going to see it
Yeah.
shared on social media. And a lot of times it's based on what your personal beliefs is politically or what have you. And because video exists, it can make it seem like this is happening everywhere and all of this is here and all this is there. So I'm curious what, especially when you're talking to community members, like what's the conversation when you're trying to stress like, look, we don't want people here who aren't supposed to be here, especially if they're doing a lot of bad stuff while they're here. We don't want these people. But at the bottom line here is that we need folks here to work. And whether they're cycling through temporarily, you know, whatever the legal path ends up being, or, you know, if it's temporary, permanent, whatever. I'm trying to navigate a fine line here. But
Yeah.
I mean, the fact of the matter is there aren't enough people, and ag is going to collapse here if we don't have any foreign workers, barring some solution that we're not aware of. So how do you? It's just such a sensitive thing, and I get it that you live and breathe this, so you can see all the nuances of it. But for people who don't, how do you communicate this so that people truly understand what your industry needs?
Yeah, I will say the majority of the time it ends up being a productive conversation, but
Okay.
you do need a little bit of a chunk of time. It's not something that you can get in and out of in 30 seconds and have success.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it takes some time to talk through it. You know, the first piece is, you know, helping them understand that, hey, ag employers, they're no different than you. They want to make sure that the people working in their business are good people, because typically they live on the family business. They're living in that house on the dairy. They're living in that house on the farm, and their kids live there, and their spouse lives there. And so, helping them understand that we're really not that different. And, yes, some of our workforce is unauthorized. Understand that we don't know who is and who isn't, because we fill out an I-9 just like any other employer fills out an I-9. We take the documents needed to fill out that I-9, complete it, and put it in the file just like your employer did when you got hired. As you walk them through all of these things, and then for those of us in year-round agriculture, you start to walk them through the fact that we don't have a visa program. The H-2A program is only for seasonal and temporary, and it's not been expanded to include year-round agriculture to this point. And you help them understand that, we don't want the status quo. We want the system to be fixed. We don't want to have this risk hanging over our family businesses that we don't know, today, tomorrow, the next day, is ICE going to show up and want to, go through my business and take down names and numbers of everybody, and anybody without status, they're going to haul off. And then I got to try and figure out, how to make my dairy run with, X number of less workers than I had a couple hours ago. I mean, you talk through all of that with people and help them understand it. They really start to come around and realize, one, we're not that different. Two, I think I agree with you that, we need to see this system fixed. And I think I understand a little bit better as to why, you've got an immigrant filling that job and not, somebody that's a domestic worker, because that always, is a rub that seems to be there as well, is, hey, just if you pay more, you'll find Americans that'll fill these jobs. And it's like, well, no, because we have more jobs in our economy than we have domestic workers. And so, there always has to be some portion of our workforce that's foreign born. And, it's going to be the jobs that are more manual in nature. The hours aren't great. It's a little bit more stressful, a little bit more strenuous. Those jobs, you're going to have the domestic workforce, pass over, because they're going to pick the job that they think, well, I'm going to be a little bit more comfortable. I get air conditioning in that job, or there's other things, other aspects to it that I prefer over an agricultural job. And so, as long as you have time to unpack all the nuances of those different facets of the conversation, you can walk away typically with some, fair amount of success.
Because you do need year-round folks, does it make you feel optimistic that eventually, once we get on the other side of this, whatever this is going to be, that will be available at some point? Is there do you feel dialogue going that way or not? Or is it still an uphill climb?
No, I mean, we've been working on immigration for 20 years. So until we get to
and you're not done yet? Come on, man.
Until we get to the pinnacle, it's going to feel like an uphill climb.
Yeah.
But we just don't know where that pinnacle is. But it is really refreshing to see it being discussed at the levels it's being discussed. Clearly, the number of times that President Trump has talked about publicly, doing something for ag employers is refreshing. We've never had a presidency take it this serious. We've never had the focus that we have on it right now. So it does feel like there's some opportunities here that we haven't had in the past. Whether that comes in the form of an executive order or congressional action, we'd probably lean that the odds are better for executive order than congressional action right now. But that kind of ebbs and flows as we work through time. And, we're not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. We just want somebody in DC to help fix this problem and give us some stability and take some of the risk out of us producing food for the country.
But then it gets challenging too, right? Because then you hear Secretary Rollins talk, and it just depends what certain words mean. So, when she's saying like no amnesty, well, okay, so what exactly do you mean by that word? Because you've got some people who are, I think, maybe optimistic, maybe perhaps like you're talking about with what the president said a few times about ag. And in fact, when he came to Iowa, to the Iowa State Fairgrounds a couple weeks back, he made another comment about this, and people are like, okay, he'll figure out something with ag here. And then Secretary Rollins says what she says, and then people are like, dang, now what's this going to be here?
I mean, it is difficult to try and parse through all of the public statements that are being made. The end of the day, I'm gonna say, well, the president, the buck kind of stops with him, and so we're gonna put a lot of weight in what he is saying. Obviously, Secretary Rollins and others are going to be advising him on how to do the policy around the big picture. But the things that the president says and the buck stopping with him gives us optimism. In terms of amnesty, the way we would look at it is, every time there's been a conversation around what legislation or an executive order should look like, when you get to the legalization piece, it's always been, okay, there's going to be a monetary penalty because there's been a misdemeanor committed to get in country without status, so whatever that situation
which is a civil infraction, I think, rather than criminal.
Yeah, and so we fix these type misdemeanors in this country with a monetary penalty. So okay, let's have a monetary penalty, and then again, these are individuals employed in a family business with the family living on the business in most circumstances. So a background check is wanted by all sides. Let's make sure that the people here in these jobs, we know who they are and we know what their history is, and we know that they're not coming from a criminal background and into nefarious activities. And so those are two of the pieces that we would say have always been part of the conversation that are certainly not amnesty. Amnesty is getting something for nothing, and if you're passing a background check and you're paying a monetary penalty, that's not something for nothing.
First of all, listening to you, you're clearly not in Congress. Because you're being very specific about things and not throwing bombs here. But I guess I'm wondering, listening to you talk, like, is this the climate, or is this why, in this climate that we have right now, is what you're talking about possible? And then maybe secondarily, is that why you believe ultimately it takes a presidential executive order, because getting Congress to agree on something, because a word like amnesty is going to get thrown out there and it gets misused and whatever the heck it means and all kinds of stuff, right? So is this, sorry to hit you with a two-parter, but I guess I'm sort of wondering if your answer to the first question is because of your core belief that an executive order might be the solution here.
I mean, it does give us optimism that the president does not seem scared of the issue. He's come back to it a number of times, even after many of his supporters that have very public platforms have come out against his stance on doing something for ag employers. He stayed strong there. He hasn't really wavered in what he said publicly on trying to find a solution here. So they're not scaring him off the issue, and that's what gives us the optimism. Is he seems brave enough to take this on and take the political heat for doing something when many others have been scared off if they were in his same shoes. So that's the piece that gives us some optimism right now. Maybe I'm overly optimistic. I hope I'm not. I hope we finally find a solution here. But we seem to have a president that's not scared of taking on some of these tough, prickly issues that others shy away from.
I wonder if you could also expand just a little bit on something you said before, because I think with anything we have in any facet of our economy, our country, you have bad actors that sort of taint everything. Most employers I've ever talked with are not the bad actors. And could you explain to people why it is so challenging? Like, I'll hear from some people who say, well, you should just never hire. You should never hire anybody who can't prove that they're here legally and they're not born here, whatever it may be. Can you explain for folks how challenging it is at the end of the day to really know the answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, one, as an employer, there's no good system to use. So you're taking down that I-9 information. Okay, so say like, yeah, I don't think your docs are real. I think you're giving me fake documents. If you get that wrong, you've just had a bias in your employment practices, and you open yourself up for a lawsuit by having a bias in your employment practices and getting it wrong. You can look at using E-Verify, but it's proven that E-Verify is, it's got a whole bunch of errors within its system. And every day you've got people without status making it through, and you got people with status, being flagged for being in country without status and having, not having a legal work permit. And so it's a system fraught with errors. And so there's not a real good system for a producer to use to try, or an employer to use to try and figure out, how do I parse out who's here with and who's not here with status. Realistically, our opinion is it shouldn't be on the employer to figure out who's in country with status and who's not. That's the job of the federal government. That's something that they should be doing. The employer shouldn't have to police that system. That's beyond what's reasonably expected of an employer. And so, at the end of the day, you're in a no-win situation as an employer. And the other piece to this conversation is, people think, oh, the employer knows, and they're paying those individuals under the table so they don't have to pay tax, so they take advantage of them and pay them a lesser wage. Nothing's further from the truth. You look at, I think it was something like 600,000 no-match letters went out to not just ag employers, but employers around the country during Trump's first administration. A no-match letter is when you're paying Social Security tax on an individual and their name and number don't match in the report that you filed when you paid the Social Security tax. Proof that all these employers are paying Social Security, they're paying withholding taxes. And so, I don't know of a single dairy producer paying workers cash under the table. They're all paying, normal payroll systems. They're paying their state, local, federal taxes. They're paying all of those things, just like any other employee. And the reality is, when you see some of these high-profile raids, they haven't happened recently, but in the past, when you've seen them, a lot of them are because those are businesses that are paying cash, and it's a pretty predictable transaction when you see large cash withdrawals out of a checking account every 2 weeks that line up with, I don't know, a payroll schedule. You tend to draw the attention of regulators when you do that repeatedly. So to think that all these businesses are paying cash under the table is just a ridiculous notion that's not very close to the truth at all.
All right, so the president calls you up tonight and says, Rick, what do we need to do? What do you tell him?
Legalize the existing workers and the immediate families that are living here with them, because that will create a more stable workforce as long as they've got a family to go home to. So provide them
legalize.
legal status.
Sorry to interrupt you, but legalize in what way?
Provide them a work visa.
Okay.
Not permanent resident status, not citizenship. Give them a visa to work in country. That's what they came here for. That's what they want, is the ability to work in America and earn money to support their family. So provide them a visa. Like we talked earlier, that's got to come with a background check, and that's got to come with some sort of monetary penalty. So this is something that's going to be cash flow positive for the country, because you're going to collect a penalty on the overall situation to get them legal status. So that's step one. Step two is, and I'll just speak for ag employers, I won't try and speak for any other sector of the economy, but our need is give us a visa program that matches up the workforce needs to a pool of workers. So for us, we need year-round ag to get access to a visa program. So we can actually, whether that's H-2A or something else, we can actually go into Mexico or other Central American countries and recruit workers for the jobs that we cannot find a domestic workforce to fill. So those really are our two main needs: is legalize the existing workers and their family, and then give us access to a visa program so we don't end up in the same place in the future.
And do you sense any progress with your congressional delegation in Idaho? Do they see your point?
I will say our congressional delegation are both House and Senate. They've gotten this for a long time. We're somewhat unique in that we've got conservative Republicans that represent us in DC, and they're with us on this issue. There's just not been the right makeup in Congress and the right colleagues for them to work with at times to be able to get something across the finish line. But our delegation definitely gets this issue, and our delegation, to give kudos to a couple of them, you've got Mike Simpson in the House, that he's been instrumental on finding Republican support for Farm Workforce Modernization Act over the last 3 or 4 Congresses. He's relentless on this issue in the House. And then in the Senate, we had Senator Crapo, going back 2 Congresses ago, was negotiating with Senator Bennett out of Colorado to try and figure out a Senate version of farm workforce after it had passed the House, that Congress. And so definitely have delegation members that get it, that are willing to go to bat for us on this issue. We just need to find some additional, some other colleagues for them to work with in some other states to get, 60 votes in the Senate and enough, votes in the House to get a simple majority to get something passed at some point in the future.
You follow so much stuff both within your state and across the country. You're following state stuff. You're following all these federal matters. You're seeing raids that may be focused primarily more on the West Coast, at least as we speak here. And I can't imagine how many conversations you have with various people. So maybe to wrap this up, what is your job like? Because people are going to come to you based on the nature of your job. You're the answer guy, right? I mean, they're going to come to you for answers. How do you do that when you're still trying to figure out how this is going to play out? I don't think we even know as a country how this is going to play out.
The majority of my conversations are with dairy producers or others that represent dairy producers in the country. And the easiest way to answer the questions is just to be honest and transparent. Often on this conversation, the answer isn't what we want to hear. But the best way to answer it is just be honest and transparent and let them know what the lay of the land is. That's the only fair thing to do. And that's the only right thing to do so that they have an understanding of, as an employer, what kind of risks are they taking on in their business? And what does this look like? What are the prospects for some sort of solution? And what can they do to try and help bring a solution along, given, where they're at in the country and who represents them in DC? That's just kind of how we approach it is, here's what we know, here's how we see the world today, and here's how we think maybe you could be helpful given, where you live and who represents you, and maybe they can, you can bring your politicians along to get them to a place of understanding on this issue.
Thank you, Rick. We appreciate you digging into all of this. Thanks for the conversation.
Happy to anytime.
Rick is also in our profile piece about him. You can find that in the American Farmland Owner Weekly newsletter. It's free. It comes out every week, and you can get it sent straight to your email inbox. Check it out now. Just go to AmericanFarmlandOwner.com. By the way, it is fun to watch our conversations here on the podcast grow. We very much appreciate it when you like the podcast and you share it so that others can join us in the future. Thanks for your support, and thanks for caring about the future of our farmland.